There are moments in sport when numbers lose their meaning, when statistics and lap times dissolve under the weight of something more primal, something written not in ink but in scar tissue. Mick Doohan, the man who once defied amputation to conquer 5 consecutive world titles, looks at Marc Márquez and does not see a rival across generations. He sees a reflection in shattered bone and in the stubborn refusal to surrender. Marc has made resilience his style, and that is harder to defeat than speed, Doohan says, and in that single sentence lies the secret that no data sheet can capture. Márquez no longer wins with reckless dives or blind instinct. He wins with the calm precision of a man who has translated pain into telemetry, fear into geometry, scars into coordinates for victory. Every squeeze of the thumb brake whispers back to Doohan's invention in 1993, a technical detail born of necessity that became a signature of survival, now carried forward like a bloodline. Watching Márquez stalk his prey from behind, never leading from pole but always cutting through with surgical inevitability, feels less like witnessing a race and more like observing the anatomy of resilience made flesh. Doohan's voice, gravelly with memory, carries an authority that statistics cannot. The difference between champions and legends is what you do when everything collapses. Marc has answered not with fury but with clarity, building a second career on patience, error, and time, the very trinity Doohan once gifted him in a midnight call at Mugello. If speed is the surface of MotoGP, then Márquez has chosen to dominate its depths, where resilience becomes the law, and legends are carved not in the act of never falling, but in the art of rising sharper, stronger, and endlessly more dangerous. And it all began on a sleepless night at Mugello in 2021, when Márquez dialed Mick Doohan's number and received not comfort, but a map to survive. It was 1 in the morning at Mugello when the paddock lay still, the fluorescent lights of the motorhome casting a sterile glow on Marc Márquez's tired face, and the silence around him carried the weight of unfinished battles. He looked at his phone, scrolling down to a number he had never dared to dial before, the digits like a code to a forbidden gate. What if he thinks I'm weak? He wondered, the doubt cutting deeper than the scar running along his right arm. The line clicked, and a rough Australian voice emerged, heavy with history. Cosas de Centendo? Mick Doohan asked. No pleasantries, no shield. Márquez hesitated, staring at his hand that no longer obeyed him in the fast right-handers, his inner voice trembling. I don't trust my body anymore. That confession fell into the void, yet it landed in the only place where it could be understood. Doohan answered with the calm sharpness of a man who had once rebuilt his destiny around titanium and pain. You must rewrite the language, Marc, not the bike. In that instant, the conversation became something more than words. It was the transfer of an unwritten survival code. A little-known detail sealed the bridge between two eras. The thumb brake, invented by Doohan in 1993, after his right leg became unreliable, was now the very solution Márquez would request the next day. The dialogue unfolded like a secret gospel, 30 minutes compressed into decades of scars, missteps, and reinventions. Marc closed his eyes, listening, not as a champion but as a student, letting the phrases pierce him like needles stitching a wound. He felt the room's air thicken, the disinfectant smell mixing with a metallic tang of memories he hadn't lived yet. His thoughts turned inward. If pain is a parameter, then I can ride with it. If fear is a language, then I must learn to speak it. The climax arrived not in shouts or tears, but in silence, the kind that reverberates after a seismic truth. That night, Marc stopped searching for the shadow of who he was and began sketching the outline of who he could become. He realized greatness doesn't always shine under the floodlights of victory. Sometimes it flickers in the dim glow of a motorhome at midnight. He sat upright, unable to sleep, the paper trembling in his hand as he wrote 3 words: time, error, patience. The handwriting was uneven, but the meaning was precise, an equation for rebirth. Outside, Mugello still dreamed, unaware that history had shifted by the quiet vibration of a phone call. The conversation did not soothe him, it unsettled him, and yet that unease was fertile. He saw himself no longer as the predator of the past, but as an apprentice of suffering, guided by a compass etched in scars. The moment was cinematic in its stillness, more powerful than a checkered flag, because it marked the ignition of a second career. The echoes of Mugello carried forward into memory, binding 2 men across generations, one from the era of two-stroke brutality and the other from the world of seamless gearboxes and carbon wings. In 1992, Phillip Island painted Doohan's destiny red with blood, titanium, and the smell of burnt leather as his right leg hung in doubt, while in 2020, Jerez tattooed Márquez's arm with steel plates and infection. The symmetry was not coincidence but a cruel choreography written by motorsport itself, where the gods demand sacrifice before granting second acts. Márquez stared at old race footage, seeing Doohan wobble down pit lane with his leg encased, whispering to himself, "That's not survival. That's defiance made mechanical." In both men, the body became a faulty circuit, unpredictable, resistant, and yet strangely fertile. "When I came back, the bike wasn't different. Doohan once admitted, and that phrase clung to Márquez like a second skin. The technical detail that sealed their kinship was hidden in telemetry. Doohan recalibrated throttle traces to mask his weak leg. Márquez later modified entry data on right-hand corners to allow micro-adjustments when his arm trembled. The parallel was eerie, as if one man's bloodline had coded the other's telemetry. Their journeys were less about winning races than about learning to listen to pain as though it were a reluctant teammate. Marc's inner monologue whispered late at night, "If Mick could turn a dead leg into a tool, then maybe my shaking arm can become an instrument too." Journalists described Doohan as a gladiator, but Márquez felt him more like a cartographer, charting invisible maps of suffering. Between the years 1994 and 1998, Doohan ruled with 5 consecutive titles, and between 2013 and 2019, Márquez spent time itself with 6. Yet both reigns were interrupted not by rivals but by the treachery of their own bodies. Watching their arcs side by side was like staring at 2 rivers born from different mountains but converging in the same restless sea. A small vibration on the handlebar, an imperceptible hesitation in lean angle. Such microscopic flaws became gaping abysses when trust in the body dissolved. Doohan's recovery rewrote the ergonomics of motorcycle racing. Márquez's reinvention redefined the psychology of competition. Their kinship was not proclaimed. It was discovered in scars and in technical anomalies only engineers could decode. In one press conference, Márquez admitted softly, "It's an honor to be compared to Mick, because only those who've been broken can understand." That sentence, more than any trophy, linked them. Their pain was not parallel lines that never touched, but converging trajectories that reshaped the definition of resilience. It was not war they fought, but a dialogue with their own machinery, a fragile duet between bone and throttle. The climax of their parallel odyssey was not victory, but the acceptance that survival itself could be the sharpest form of triumph. Marc Márquez stopped chasing the ghost of who he used to be and began instead to study the anatomy of his new self, a rider reconstructed not in instinct but in calculation. Gone were the reckless dives into impossible corners, replaced by a patience that seemed alien to those who had once called him a kamikaze. "You don't win by forcing the past," he told a close engineer. "You win by designing the future from your scars." The decision was not poetic but technical. His telemetry showed right arm instability in long right-handers, and he learned to offset it with altered body positioning, shifting 3 centimeters further forward to redistribute weight. To an outsider, 3 centimeters is nothing, but in MotoGP, it is an entire new grammar. His inner voice whispered during endless nights of video review, "If instinct betrays me, then memory must guide me." Engineers began to describe his style as cellular memory, a body coding sequences of movement as if they were genetic instructions. Márquez himself became a scientist of his own imperfection, annotating every tremor, every misfire, not as flaws but as coordinates. The transformation was painful, like sculpting marble with bare hands, yet it revealed a form stronger than before. Observers noticed how he no longer attacked at the first opening, but stalked the moment until the track unfolded like a lock waiting for its key. It was a strange new Márquez, less firework, more scalpel, still lethal, but in a way that unnerved rivals because it was colder, sharper, merciless. The metaphor was not of war, but of gardening, pruning away reckless branches to let the tree grow with disciplined strength. Critics said he had lost his instinct, but in truth he had redefined it, converting impulse into a software upgrade written in nerve endings and data points. Ducati engineers nicknamed him Il Paziente Chirurgico, the surgical patient, because his stares at telemetry screens lasted longer than his conversations. Each session became a laboratory, each lap a hypothesis tested under extreme pressure. He once confessed to a teammate, "I ride now as if I already know the mistake before it comes," and the room fell silent at the eerie calmness of the claim. What he built was not a comeback, but an entirely new archetype of rider, where instinct was no longer the weapon, lucidity was. His reinvention was not an act of defiance, but a submission to reality, bending until reality itself broke into his favor. This was the Márquez of the after, a man who turned fragility into his sharpest edge. The climax of this transformation came quietly, in the realization that no opponent could punish him more than he had already punished himself. The thumb break was never meant to be a symbol. Yet for Marc Márquez, it became the bridge between despair and possibility, a lever of survival disguised as a detail of engineering. Invented by Mick Doohan in 1993, after his right leg lost its reliability, the device allowed him to control the rear brake with his left hand, rewriting the ergonomics of speed. 3 decades later, in the sterile quiet of Mugello, Márquez asked his mechanics to install it, his voice calm but loaded with something more than technical need. "Let's try it," he said simply, though the subtext was an entire philosophy, adapting the bike to the rider, not the rider to the bike. The detail might have gone unnoticed to spectators, but inside the garage, engineers exchanged glances. This was the moment the past whispered to the present. Marc's inner thought pressed against his ribs. "If my arm fails me, then this thumb will speak for me." What followed was not merely a change of control input, but a change of destiny. For each press of that lever became a signal to his mind that limits could be bypassed. Riders often speak of balance, but this was something different, an invisible prosthesis, a psychological crutch turned into a tactical weapon. On track, the thumb brake altered weight transfer in ways subtle but decisive, giving Márquez the ability to stabilize exits when his right arm quivered. Engineers noted the data spike: smoother rear tire degradation, more consistent line through turn 9, less chatter in transition. It was as if the bike itself began to trust him again. Yet the story was not about mechanics. It was about inheritance, about the invisible lineage between two men who had refused to surrender. The metaphor was not of war but of music. Doohan had composed a note in 1993, and Márquez was now playing it in a different key. "Il freno a police non è un trucco," Doohan reminded him years later. "It is your second chance." That sentence became both warning and blessing, echoing in Márquez's helmet as he tested the new system. What appeared small, a lever tucked beside a grip, was in truth monumental, a symbol of adaptation made flesh and aluminum. Rivals saw the change but misunderstood it, thinking it a gimmick, until results proved otherwise. Marc realized with sudden clarity, "I am not chasing my old style. I am building a new instrument." The climax unfolded in silence, not in the roar of engines, but in the still moment when Márquez first squeezed that lever mid-corner and felt the bike obey. When Marc Márquez walked into the Gresini Ducati garage in early 2024, the air was thick with expectation, skepticism, and the quiet hum of computers downloading terabytes of telemetry, yet he carried only a notebook filled with handwritten ideas. The GP25 was a beast on paper, a symphony of horsepower and aerodynamics, but in practice it had humbled champions with its violent character in mid-corner transitions. Márquez did not come to adapt meekly. He came to dismantle assumptions. "We won't just ride it," he told his crew. "We will redesign it while racing it." The words hung heavy, not arrogance but declaration. A little-known technical decision was his request to shift the swing arm pivot by a mere millimeter to alter rear grip under acceleration, an adjustment most riders never dared suggest. The change destabilized balance in testing but unlocked traction previously hidden, as if he had found a secret passage in a familiar house. His inner monologue whispered as he scribbled notes between runs. "Every fault this bike shows me is not a problem. It is an invitation to rebuild it in my image." Ducati engineers, used to cautious iterations, found themselves dragged into his rhythm, pages of data annotated by Márquez's personal handwriting. The metaphor was not of war but of architecture. He was not occupying a house, he was redrawing its foundations while still living inside it. He analyzed throttle maps, traction control phases, and even requested new clutch staging to relieve strain on his recovering arm. Rivals watched with disbelief as he appeared less like a rider and more like a conductor tuning an orchestra while playing the violin himself. An anonymous engineer confessed, "It's like having an engineer who also laps at 330 kilometers per hour." Results came quickly: reduced rear tire drop-off, smoother mid-corner corrections, and a bike that began to respond as if it had been waiting for him all along. Márquez understood that risk was not chaos. It was architecture, a building erected with precision where others saw ruins. "He doesn't just ride the Ducati," Doohan commented from afar. "He designs it every lap." That quote crystallized what many had felt but not articulated. In debriefs, Marc spoke less about feelings and more about structures, angles, and flows, his language closer to geometry than adrenaline. His transformation from kamikaze to strategist reached its purest form in his synergy, the rider becoming the architect of risk itself. And the climax was reached when, after just 4 rounds, Ducati's engineers labeled his settings the new reference, an alien blueprint carved in scar tissue and stubborn clarity. The Márquez who once carved fear into rivals with impossible lunges was gone, replaced by a figure colder, sharper, and infinitely more calculating, a transformation that startled even those who had raced alongside him for years. Gone were the wide-eyed overtakes that bordered on madness. Now every move was measured, delayed, a predator who no longer attacked in frenzy but waited for the pulse of inevitability. "I don't fight the bike anymore," he admitted during a debrief. "I'll let the bike show me when to strike." Engineers confirmed the data. His braking markers had shifted later, but not deeper, his corner entries smoother, his mid-turn speed less volatile, a technical rebirth etched in telemetry curves. His inner monologue whispered during one of those long, solitary nights, "If chaos wants to find me, now precision must sustain me." Rivals soon realized that he was no longer vulnerable to impatience, no longer burning his tires chasing desperate stabs at glory. The metaphor was not of war but of medicine. The reckless surgeon had become a calm diagnostician, cutting only where necessary, leaving no wasted scar. Ducati analysts noted a little-known adjustment. Márquez requested micro-changes to throttle pickup sensitivity, reducing initial aggression by 2%, a detail that gave him surgical control in the final laps. Those who mistook patience for passivity were silenced when he sliced through fields like a scalpel through tissue, precise, clean, irreversible. Doohan, watching from afar, described it in a single phrase: "Marc has dislearned aggression to relearn precision." That paradox carried the weight of a prophecy fulfilled. Fans who once gasped at his reckless bravery now found themselves holding their breath for the timing of his strike, knowing it would come late, silent, unstoppable. Each lap became a chessboard, each apex a move prepared 3 corners earlier, a rhythm so detached from spectacle it became terrifying in its inevitability. His metamorphosis unnerved rivals because it showed not recovery, but evolution, the kind that no longer risks everything yet wins more decisively. He wasn't a kamikaze anymore. He was a surgeon with endless patience, dissecting weaknesses until nothing remained. Inside his helmet, the thought returned like a mantra: wait, measure, execute. The contrast between the Márquez of old and the Márquez of now was not decline but ascension, the flowering of a new form of dominance. And in Argentina, when he carved through 5 riders in 6 laps without touching a fairing, the climax of his new identity crystallized in silence. No fireworks, only surgical inevitability. When Marc Márquez entered Ducati, Francesco Bagnaia was the anointed heir, the clean technician of Borgo Panigale, precise as a compass and crowned twice as world champion. Yet within months the balance tilted. The garage that once revolved around Pecco's calm authority began to whisper new names: reference laps, baseline setups, comparative graphs, all marked with a number 93. In debriefs, technicians found themselves saying it bluntly: "Mark reference," a word that cut deeper than any headline. Márquez's inner thoughts surfaced as he observed Bagnaia's quiet frustration. "I am not here to dethrone him. I am here to rebuild myself, but the clock has chosen me as his mirror." The tension was invisible yet suffocating. 2 philosophies colliding in the same garage. Bagnaia, methodical and composed, rode like a mathematician, trusting data and rhythm, while Márquez rode like an improvisational pianist, bending the score without breaking it. When Marc arrived, the hierarchy changed without a word. Confessed an anonymous Ducati engineer, he doesn't just ride differently, he makes the bike speak a new dialect. The little-known technical marker of their duel appeared in tire wear data. Pecco conserved rubber linearly. Marc fluctuated wildly then stabilized late, finishing races with an edge that confused analysts. The metaphor was not of war but of astronomy. 2 suns caught in the same orbit, one born of stability, the other of collapse and rebirth, forcing the paddock to choose where to look. Bagnaia, dignified but pressured, pushed harder in sprints, his aggression unfamiliar, almost desperate, as if Márquez's presence had unlocked a shadow version of himself. "You can't let him set the rhythm," Pecco admitted in a rare moment of candor. "If you follow, you're already lost." Márquez did not answer. His silence was its own form of dominance. Engineers noticed the subtle psychological swing. Where once Bagnaia was teacher, now he studied Márquez's lines, braking, corner entry angles, a role reversal sharper than any overtake. In Qatar, the turning point arrived when Pecco was told in the debrief, "Your comparison is with Marc." It was less feedback than revelation. Doohan, recalling his own days of internal rivalries, said dryly, "When someone new arrives and bends the reference, you either evolve or you vanish." The climax of this rivalry did not explode in a crash or a brawl, but in the quiet acknowledgement that Márquez had redrawn the gravitational field of Ducati. By mid-2025, Marc Márquez led the championship with a dominance that felt statistical, Yet the numbers alone betrayed the deeper truth. Every victory was stitched with a thread of survival. He had not taken a single pole position all season, yet he hunted from behind with a patience that unnerved rivals, converting disadvantage into inevitability. "It's not about starting in front," he told journalists with a faint smile. "It's about finishing when it matters most." The Ducati GP25, once called volatile, now seemed tamed, but insiders knew it was not the machine that had changed. It was the rider who had rewritten the dialogue. A little-known technical key was his insistence on modified clutch staging, introduced in Barcelona, which gave him smoother launches even when his arm trembled under initial load. The data showed consistency, but the story was flesh and bone. His inner monologue, in the quiet moments after podiums, whispered, "Perfection breaks, resilience lasts." This mantra became the silent engine of his season. Rivals attacked in bursts, but Márquez absorbed the pressure, as if his scars had taught him the elasticity of time. The metaphor was not of war, but of sculpture. Each race was a chisel strike against stone, revealing not the flash of fireworks, but the permanence of form. Mick Doohan, watching from Assen, summed it in one phrase: "Marc has made resilience his style, and that is harder to defeat than speed." Fans saw tears in Saxony, precision in Argentina, inevitability in Mugello, yet what united them was not spectacle but control. His Ducati mechanics called him Il Paziente Chirurgico, repeating it like an incantation each time he calmly requested micro-adjustments rather than dramatic changes. The once reckless boy who crashed into history had matured into a master who carved it with steady hands. Even Bagnaia, once Ducati's axis, admitted privately he doesn't let the chaos touch him anymore. The psychological aura was complete. Márquez no longer fought to prove he was the fastest, but to demonstrate that scars could be transformed into coordinates for victory. Every lap was a lesson in delayed violence, every win a celebration of restraint disguised as attack. The climax of this metamorphosis arrived not with a championship trophy, but with a gesture. Clutching his helmet in Argentina, he whispered into the microphone, "I've learned to wait." And the paddock, filled with rivals, engineers, and ghosts of legends past, understood that the law of resilience had just been inscribed in MotoGP's DNA.